Thank you very much. Please be seated. We'll go back on the record in the matter of State of Utah versus Martin MacNeill. He is present with defense counsel. The state's attorneys are present. We are outside the presence of the jury. Are you ready to proceed?
We are, Judge.
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good. Let's have the jury in.
All rise for the jury.
Thank you. Please be seated. We are back on the record in the matter of State of Utah versus Martin MacNeill. Mr. MacNeill is present with his attorneys. The state's attorneys are present. The state may call its first witness.
The state calls Dr. Scott Thompson.
If you'll call Dr. Thompson, please. Dr. Thompson, if you'll come forward here to the clerk's desk right here, please raise your right hand and take an oath.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the case and opinion before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you. If you'll be seated here, please. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Thompson.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Fine, thanks.
Will you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
Scott Kent Thompson, S-C-O-T-T-K-E-N-T-T-H-O-M-P-S-O-N.
Thank you. Will you start out by telling us what your occupation is?
I am a facial plastic surgeon and an otolaryngologist, board certified in both.
Where do you work?
I have 3 offices, one in Layton, Bountiful, and Draper.
Will you describe your education, please?
Sure. So I got an undergraduate degree from Utah State University in piano performance, and I did pre-medical education at that same time. And then I was admitted to medical school at the University of Rochester in New York, where I did my medical school training, and decided at that point to pursue subspecialty training in otolaryngology for my residency. And then following that, I did an additional fellowship in facial plastic surgery. That was all in Rochester, New York.
Okay. Will you clarify first what, I think it's
Otolaryngology is otherwise known as ear, nose, and throat.
Okay, thank you. As part of your medical school training, were you educated in pharmacology?
Yeah, we had pharmacology courses.
What is that?
That's the study of drugs and interactions and the way that the body accepts those and the way they're metabolized and things like that.
What's the purpose of being educated?
The purpose of education in pharmacology is to understand medications, and because we would be prescribing those to patients.
Okay. You've mentioned your medical residencies. The first one, the
Otolaryngology, yeah.
Otolaryngology. Was that part of becoming a plastic surgeon?
Part of otolaryngology is facial plastic surgery. So there's some training, but if you really want to become specialized in that area, then typically you'll do additional training beyond that, which is what I decided to do.
Okay. And how long did these medical residencies last? I think you said one was...
So there's a one-year internship after medical school, and that's just general surgery, where you're doing all aspects of surgery, and then 4 additional years of otolaryngology, and then 1 additional year of facial plastic surgery.
Okay. And when did you finish with all this?
I finished my fellowship in 2006, in May or early June of 2006.
Okay, and by that time, you've earned a lot of experience. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Are you a licensed physician?
I am.
And does plastic surgery require any type of specialized licensing, or is that?
No, it doesn't.
It's covered by your medical license?
If you have a medical license, you can practice medicine, and hopefully you're trained to do what you're doing.
Okay. Were you licensed in 2007?
I was.
Okay. From the time that you finished your residencies in 2006 to 2007, what were you doing then?
I was starting my practice here in Utah. I joined a practice, and I was just kind of building it and practicing what I'd been trained in.
Okay. Did you ever know Martin and Michelle MacNeill?
Not prior to our first meeting.
Okay, and but did you come to know them?
Yes.
Okay, will you describe how that happened?
As part of what I was trying to pursue my specialty in facial plastic surgery, I had a ad in the paper. I think it was for Botox or something like that, and the MacNeills responded to that ad and called the office.
Do you know which of the MacNeills responded?
I believe it was Martin that called and made the appointment.
Okay. Would you recognize Martin MacNeill?
Yes.
Do you see him here today?
Yes.
Will you point him out, please?
It's there on the left behind you.
Okay, and would you name the color of his tie?
Light blue.
Okay. Your Honor, may the record reflect that Dr. Thompson has identified Mr. MacNeill.
Do you stipulate? The record may so reflect.
Thank you. Will you describe when you first take a new patient on, what's your initial process?
Well, we have a consultation, and depending on what the patient is interested in, then that's what directs the consultation. And so, for example, if somebody is concerned with the way that they're aging, then they'll come in, and I'll ask them what they're seeing and what they want to talk about, and then that will start the discussion at that point, and then we'll go from there.
And you go from there to figuring out what?
To figuring out what, if anything, I can do to help them.
Okay. And in the MacNeill's case, who was well, let me ask, did you have a consultation with them?
Yes, I did.
Who was the prospective patient?
Michelle.
Okay. And would you give us an overview of what the concerns were there?
So You know, it was kind of a back and forth between Martin and Michelle in the initial consultation. She expressed concerns that she was approaching middle age and was starting to see some changes in her face that she was interested in research, and they maybe have even researched me and figure out I'm the one they want to have surgery with. And in those cases, people typically will schedule the surgery fairly quickly and go forward. And then in other cases, you know, I might see somebody and then come back a year later and say, "Hey, I'm ready." You know, so it kind of depends.
Okay. And define two categories. Did Martin, or excuse me, did Michelle MacNeill fit either one of those?
They were more interested in.
Okay. And you say, is that both Martin and Michelle?
Hard to see necessarily. Martin had indicated that he wanted to take Michelle on a cruise, and they wanted to do this, but he wanted to make sure she was able to recover in time to go on the cruise. And so, you know, I don't know at that initial consultation if they said or we're moving forward. But then after the consultation, after they had a chance to visit, I assumed they called and scheduled the surgery. And so at that point, then we schedule another visit to talk about things in more detail.
Okay. And maybe we've jumped ahead, or maybe I've jumped ahead of myself a little bit here in asking some of the procedures that you discussed that could address some of Michelle's concerns. Did they select any of those?
I don't know if they actually, well, yeah, actually, Martin, actually, I do remember this saying that we want to do everything because we want to just kind of address this all at once and do everything we've discussed. I do remember that.
Okay, and did Michelle agree to that?
Yes.
I'd like to take a step back again also, and you said that Martin introduced himself as a physician and an attorney. Did he ever discuss with you any type of specialty in?
He told me he was a psychiatrist.
Overruled, he may answer.
He told me he was a psychiatrist.
Did he ever discuss working as an attorney?
Maybe briefly, but I don't remember any details of that.
Did he tell you who his employer was?
I don't think so.
Okay.
At some point he did. I don't remember when it was. He told me he was employed by the state of Utah, I believe, at some point, but I don't know when that was.
Okay. Did Michelle express any hesitations to you about the surgery?
Yes, and every patient does, as I said. She was concerned about the recovery and the downtime and the risks, and that's why we have an additional visit to kind of talk about all of those things and make sure somebody, you know, really wants to do something like this.
Sure. You said that additional visit is normally scheduled after someone has elected to do the procedures and notified you or your office.
Yes.
Did you have a subsequent visit with Martin and Michelle?
We did.
Michelle?
Yeah.
Do you recall when that was?
That visit was on April 1st, 2007.
Okay. When it comes, I'd like to kind of talk to you in generalities about your practice. When
Yeah.
it comes to evaluating a prospective patient's fitness for surgery like this, can you describe the process that you use to do that?
Sure. There's a medical intake form that we use that asks a lot of detailed questions about past medical history, current problems, current medications, past surgeries, allergies, and then there's a physical examination that I do to assess the patient from a physical standpoint. And if they have any underlying medical problems, oftentimes those are followed up on with their treating physician or whoever is managing that.
Okay. So in your office, do you, in this evaluation, you said you perform a physical. Is this a full physical examination?
Typically, at the initial consultation, it's not a full physical examination. It's just more of an examination of their face and the things that we're talking about. And then if they decide they want to do surgery, then I do a more detailed examination at that point.
Okay. Can you just, I think many of us know, but if you'll just describe your understanding of what a primary care physician is.
A primary care physician is someone who is managing your general health. Typically, it's someone that people see on a semi-regular basis. They typically manage most of their basic, medical problems such as high blood pressure or asthma or, things that are kind of considered more routine problems. Those are typically managed by a primary care physician. And then they will refer out to a specialist if things become more complicated or more specialized.
Okay. And in this preoperative evaluation that you do, what is the role of a patient's or a prospective patient's primary care physician?
If the patient is perfectly healthy and they don't have any medical problems, I typically don't even consult with the primary care physician. But if they have any medical problems that I feel need to be evaluated or followed up on, then we'll have, we'll make contact with that office or have the patient make contact. It kind of varies a little bit.
Okay. Did you evaluate Michelle MacNeill's health before in this kind of preoperative evaluation?
Yes.
Will you describe whether there were any concerns, and if so, what they were?
Well, she didn't list anything as a medical problem on her intake form, and she listed Martin as her primary care physician on her intake form. And so, yeah, just on the initial intake form, there were no medical problems listed at all. She'd had a hysterectomy. She'd mentioned a couple of surgeries that she'd had in the past, but no active ongoing medical problems.
Okay, were any medical problems raised during your preoperative?
Yes, Martin mentioned to me that in the preoperative visit that he thought she had some high blood pressure, and he'd actually had her seeing another physician for that and had been prescribed some medication for the high blood pressure. But it was kind of just a early thing, and it wasn't a particularly severe problem.
Okay. Did he ever tell you who that other physician was or anything like that?
No.
Okay. You've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I want to maybe get a little further explanation about what were Martin's representations to you about this high blood pressure problem?
He just said, I think she has a little bit of a high blood pressure problem because I had it checked out, and so the doctors, that I had her check out with is going to put her on an ACE inhibitor, which is a blood pressure medication, and so I was, using him as a primary care physician in that instance.
My next question is, did you ever follow up with the specialist who was treating her for high blood pressure?
No.
Why not?
Well, because Martin was her primary care physician.
Okay.
And also because it was an early mild problem that I typically wouldn't follow up on that. Even if I had never met the primary care physician, if a patient was on a blood pressure medication and their blood pressure was well controlled, I wouldn't call the primary care physician to follow up on that further.
Okay. Do you know whether, well, it sounds like I'll strike that. It sounds like you've answered that already. Does a primary care physician make any type of final authorization clearing someone for surgery, or is that your job?
Sometimes they do. If I'm worried about a medical problem, for example, if someone's had a heart bypass surgery, I usually will make sure I have clearance from their primary care doctor or their cardiologist before I would proceed with the surgery. Not typically with something like high blood pressure, though.
Okay. Did you seek any clearance in Michelle's case?
Just what I had already obtained from Martin.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you about that meeting you had with Michelle on April 1st. Is that the time that you would have performed the type of evaluation you've just described?
Yes.
Do you recall who attended that visit?
Yes, it was Martin, Alexis, and Michelle.
And do you know who Alexis was?
I think that they had both told me about this daughter that they had that was going to medical school. They were proud of her, I think, and then they brought her to the preoperative visit, but that was the first time I'd met her.
And I'm assuming they both consented to her presence.
Yes.
And did they tell you why she was present?
I don't know that they told me, but I just think because she was in the medical field, they thought it might be a good idea to have her along as well.
Okay. At this visit, do you discuss with a prospective patient what their plans are for postoperative care?
We do.
Did you discuss that with Michelle?
Yes.
Do you recall what she said about her plans?
She was, again, I know she was nervous about surgery because I specifically remember saying, okay, we're signed up for a lot of surgery here for your forehead, your mid-face, and your lower face, but we could do less if you wanted. That would be a little easier to recover from. But I think those were her main concerns, was just the surgery itself and also the recovery period. And I want to make sure that someone's comfortable before we go ahead and do something like this.
Okay, and how did Michelle react to that consultation?
I feel like she was comfortable and ready to go, but nervous.
Okay, and did she discuss with you at all what her plans might be for how she'd receive care after the surgery was over?
Sustained. I don't know who said it.
I'm sorry, did Michelle discuss with you her plans for postoperative care?
Same objection, and it is not in relation to receiving medical care, but it's just a comment on what she may do afterwards.
Sustained, if you can lay further foundation as to a statement for medical diagnosis or treatment.
Okay. When it comes to postoperative care, how do you handle that with a patient? How do you anticipate that? Let me ask you that.
Well, so typically we discuss the care of specifically of the the wounds and the incisions that will be present after surgery, how those have to be managed and cared for, and a lot of times I'll mention to people that it's good to have a little bit of assistance to help with those things because, for example, some of the incisions are behind the ear and they're hard to see, so usually they require some help.
Help doing what?
Cleaning the incisions and just doing the basic wound care. Typically, people need rides to their appointments because oftentimes they're on pain medication, and I don't recommend that they drive when they've just had eyelid surgery or when they're on pain medication.
Okay, so when someone's had the type of surgeries that Michelle was being evaluated for, are they able to walk out of surgery on their own and take care of themselves?
Yes, they're able to walk out on their own, and as I said, sometimes they need a little bit of assistance with some of the wound care.
Okay. Is it your what's your practice for making sure that a patient has proper postoperative care?
We usually just kind of ask them, usually if they live with family, then they say, my husband's going to be helping me with this, or my daughter will be helping me with the postoperative care. I always tell them you have to have a ride, to your visits. If they're single and they live alone, then usually I recommend that they make some arrangements to have someone come and stay with them, or that they go to someone's house for the first few days or for first week or so after surgery.
And is that consultation, that recommendation, part of your care of your patient?
It is.
Did Michelle discuss that postoperative care with you?
I don't remember any specific discussion about her postoperative care with Michelle.
Okay. I'm going to ask you again, similarly to the pre-consultation, or excuse me, to the initial consultation on March 22nd. At this visit, well, let me ask you, was Martin present? I don't recall.
At the initial visit? I'm sorry.
At this pre-operative.
At the preoperative visit, yeah. Martin, Michelle, and Alexis were there.
I think you did mention that. Was anyone doing more talking than anyone else at this visit?
I think with regard to some of the more of the medical side, Michelle always deferred to Martin on those issues. For example, the blood pressure, the medications, those kinds of things were always discussed primarily through Martin. The concerns about surgery and the questions and those kinds of things, I think, came more from Michelle, and then all of my discussion was done directly with them. And also there's also an assistant that I have that goes over some of these details as well. So I wasn't present for the entire visit. There was also an assistant that I had going over some wound care instructions and things like that.
Okay. Will you describe, or excuse me, will you name the medications that you normally prescribe to someone as part of this type of cosmetic surgery?
Sure. So normally I give Vicodin, also known as Lortab, which is a prescription pain medication. I'm going to... Go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but Vicodin, Lortab, what is the I guess the generic name for that.
Hydrocodone and acetaminophen. It's a combination drug of those two.
Okay. And that's for pain, you said?
That's for pain.
Please continue.
And I give everyone an antibiotic. The generic name is cephalexin for that antibiotic that we prescribe. I give everybody a sleeping medication called Ambien because facelift patients in particular a lot of times have a little trouble sleeping for the first few days. So I usually give 7 pills of that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
The generic name for Ambien, do you?
I can't remember. I am sorry. That's what I learned in my pharmacology class. I can't remember now. I could name it off of a list, but I can't come up with it.
Okay, we'll move on. So Ambien for sleeping, Vicodin or Lortab for pain, an antibiotic.
And then a steroid called a Medrol dose pack, and that's given for swelling and inflammation after surgery.
Okay. Are there any others?
That's typically all I prescribe for this.
Let me ask you.
Occasionally, I will prescribe something for nausea. If somebody says, you know, I usually get really nauseated with surgery, then I'll usually prescribe a nausea medication at that time as well.
Okay. Do you have a one that you normally prescribe?
Phenergan is probably the most commonly. And that one,
I hate to put
again, yeah, no, I'm supposed to know all these generic names, and I just get so used to using the common names that I can't remember. I'm sorry.
When it comes to specifically to Michelle,
Yeah.
did you prescribe any of these medications to her?
Yes, all of them.
Okay, all of them.
All of the ones I've mentioned, including Phenergan, the nausea medication, and a couple of others as well.
Why did you prescribe the Phenergan?
Martin was really, he was the one that directed this discussion. He said, I'm really concerned about my wife. She gets nauseated easily, she gets anxious, and I just want to make sure I have everything that I might need in the post-operative period to cover her for these issues.
Did you prescribe any additional medications?
Yes, I prescribed oxycodone and acetaminophen, which is a little stronger pain medication than the hydrocodone, and I prescribed Valium, which is an anxiolytic medication, and again, the generic name fails me. I'm sorry.
Can you describe? Well, no, go ahead.
I can't remember the name of that one. And then I also prescribed a Lortab elixir, which is the hydrocodone, again, but it's in a liquid form, because he just mentioned he was a little concerned about her being able to take pills, and he wanted a liquid option as well.
What would be the concern about taking pills?
I mean, when you do a facelift surgery or mid-face, you can have you know, some pain in your jaw and numbness, pain in your jaw and swelling, and you know, typically people can take pills, but I didn't. You know, he asked for a liquid as well, and so I gave him one.
Is there any difference between the pill form and the elixir?
Not if they're taken in the same dose.
Okay.
And then just one other thing, there's erythromycin ophthalmic ointment, which is an eye ointment that's used after eyelid surgery, that I actually would have typically prescribed that as well, that I didn't mention before.
Okay. So
and that was prescribed. Yes.
When it came to, or excuse me, were there any modifications you made to your prescription for Phenergan?
I gave 10 of those, and I usually will give six to 10 of those pills. I'd say 6 is probably my more typical amount, but in this case, it looks like I prescribed 10 pills.
What's how do you figure that number?
Most people don't need nausea medication for more than a couple of days after this kind of surgery because it's usually related to anesthesia effects. That's the most common cause that people are nauseated after surgery. And so I usually try to just keep the number of pills that I'm prescribing as small as possible to cover the problem.
Okay. If I could have just 1 minute. Go ahead. Let me ask you, why did you prescribe these extra drugs, specifically Percocet and Valium?
That was because Martin indicated to me that he was very concerned about his wife, that she didn't handle pain well, that she got very anxious, and he was just concerned that she wouldn't do well without having these other options available.
Okay. Was Michelle present when this request was made?
Yes.
Did she say anything about it?
She, I think, just smiled when he had mentioned those things, that he thought that she would be anxious and you know, wouldn't do well with pain. I remember her just kind of smiling, but she didn't really say anything.
Okay. When did you make these prescriptions?
These were made at the time of that preoperative visit that we discussed on April 1st.
Okay, so will you run us down real quick? I'm sorry to, hopefully this isn't tedious, but will you run down the total prescription tally that Michelle received?
Yes. Keflex, Phenergan. The Keflex is the antibiotic. The Phenergan is the anti-nausea medication. The Valium is the anxiety medication. Percocet is the pain medication. So we gave the Percocet pills instead of the Lortab or the hydrocodone pills, although I did prescribe the hydrocodone liquid as well. So 2 pain medication prescriptions. The Ambien for the sleeping, the erythromycin eye ointment, and then the Medrol dose pack for the swelling, and then I already mentioned this, the Lortab elixir, the hydrocodone elixir liquid medication for pain.
Your Honor, I'd like to have an exhibit marked if I could.
You may. You may.
Dr. Thompson, I'm handing you what's been marked States Exhibit 1. It's a document. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Can you describe what it is?
This is, the first page is a medication instruction sheet that we give to all of our patients that are having this type of surgery. And then the second one is a phone call, some notes from a phone call subsequent.
Okay. Let's go to the first page. Well, let me ask, do you know the source of these pages?
Yeah, they're from this chart here that I have on my desk.
Okay, and that chart pertains to whom?
Michelle.
And is it your file on her?
Yes.
Are those originals or duplicates? What I've handed you?
What you've handed me is a duplicate.
Okay, and do you have the original there with you?
I think so, but I'll have to double check. I do.
Let me ask just briefly, does what I've handed you in marked States Exhibit number 1, is that the same as your original?
They appear to be identical.
Okay. The first page you said is one called medical.
Medication instructions.
Okay, that you give. I'd like to direct your attention to the bottom of that. Do you see any handwritten notes?
Yes.
Do you know whose notes they are?
Yes, that's my handwriting.
Okay. And what do those notes say about the medication?
It says also,
I'm sorry, it's not been offered.
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. The state would offer this as its Exhibit 1 moves to admit.
No objection.
State's Exhibit Number 1 is admitted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
so the handwritten note says also Percocet given per husband request, Phenergan suppositories per husband request.
Okay. Can you describe what a suppository is?
A suppository is administered rectally, and that's oftentimes the form we will use for nausea medications.
Why is that?
Because people are nauseated and they can't get the medication to stay down sometimes.
Okay. Is there any other difference between Phenergan administered rectally as opposed to orally?
No.
Overruled. He may answer.
They're the same milligrams of Phenergan. They just, maybe the pill is a little different shape, but that's it.
Okay. When you were in medical school, were you educated on the function of major organs?
Yes,
Did that include the liver?
it did.
Did that education and your pharmacology education, did that teach you about how drugs are metabolized through major organs?
It did.
Can liver impairment affect how certain drugs are cleared from the body?
Yes.
Are any of these drugs, do you know whether any of these drugs that you've prescribed are metabolized by the liver?
I think many of them are metabolized by the liver, but I don't know. The only one I know for sure is the acetaminophen. The Tylenol is metabolized by the liver for sure, and then the others I'm not sure on.
Okay. Generally speaking then, if someone is taking drugs that are cleared by the liver and the liver's not functioning properly, what happens?
Then the medication could build up in the body and create a negative adverse effect, or not so much that medication, but if you added more medications before it was cleared, then that's when you could have trouble.
Okay. Is there a formal term for that?
Toxicity.
Is drug toxicity from postoperative medications normally an issue in your practice?
No. I'm very careful about instructions that I give to people preoperatively regarding the medications and their potential interactions.
Okay. What about drug toxicity from liver impairment?
That would only be a discussion if someone had a liver problem that was kind of an end-stage liver problem. Even people that have mildly elevated liver enzymes don't have trouble metabolizing the medications. It's more if someone was in liver failure, then we would say we can't give this medication or something like that.
Objection, can move to strike on foundation.
Overruled. He testified that he has received training in the metabolism of prescription medications in the human body. You may cross him on that issue. Go ahead.
Thank you. So if someone's liver is too sick to handle the drugs you prescribed, would you know that before surgery?
Yes.
And how would you know?
Because they would have other medical problems related to their liver failure. It would have to be liver failure to be to the extent that someone couldn't handle any of those medications at all.
Okay. And did Michelle manifest anything that would indicate that you thought the drugs might pose a problem for her liver?
No.
Did either Martin or Michelle talk to you about her liver?
No.
Did her liver come up as part of your preoperative evaluation?
No.
Do you know whether any of these drugs that you prescribed is a central nervous system depressant?
Any narcotic medication, for example, the hydrocodone and the oxycodone are both central nervous system depressants. The anxiety medications can have central nervous system depressant effects, and the Ambien, many of them are actually.
Okay. Do you know what central nervous system depressants do generally?
Typically, it just makes the patient more sleepy, and the thing that we get concerned about is decreased respiratory rate with over suppression of the central nervous system.
Okay. How does this help with pain?
Well, there are also receptors in the brain that are responsible for communicating pain to the patient. And the medications that we give that depress the central nervous system help to dull that sensation so that the pain is controlled.
Okay. You've already said it makes a person sleepy, so that obviously helps with sleep. What about with nausea?
Yeah, and it's the same thing. For example, the Phenergan helps with that nausea sensation is also a central nervous system or a brain response, and it's depressed in the brain.
How about anxiety?
Same thing.
Okay. Do you know what happens when someone combines drugs that depress the central nervous system?
If they're combined inappropriately, then it can cause over-sedation and decreased respiratory rate.
Okay. Can you describe what a therapeutic dose is?
A therapeutic dose is the amount that you would prescribe that would be considered the correct amount to achieve the desired effect.
Okay. What would happen if someone is under the therapeutic dose in their level of the drug?
Then they would probably need more medication.
What about overdosed?
Then they would need to wait before they gave any more medication.
Okay. What would be the effect if someone took Ambien, Phenergan, Percocet, and Valium around the same time?
Those would combine to create those could all interact together to create a combined central nervous system depression.
Okay. Do you know what what the effect of that depression would be?
It just all depends on how much was given and over what period of time. It could just make a person sleepy or less responsive, or it could make them asleep and still breathing, or it could make them completely apneic, which means they're not breathing at all.
So is it safe to say that this combination could be dangerous?
Yes.
How do you take precautions against that danger?
The things that I do to take precautions is I normally only prescribe the medications that I mentioned to you before. And I also give very specific instructions to the patients where I say, so you take this medication and then you need to wait a half hour to assess its effect before you give any more. And I always tell people for medications, the ones that are the typical ones that I do, Phenergan, the nausea medication and the pain medication, I tell people you shouldn't take those at the same time because they both have central nervous system depressant effects. And so you kind of have to wait and see. And a lot of times these things have overlapping effects as well. And so if you take a pain medication, it may secondarily reduce your effect of nausea. And so it's best to only take one pill at a time and then reassess after that pill has taken effect.
Okay, so I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about the overlapping effects. Will you describe how that happens?
Well,
Or maybe give an example.
If two drugs have the ability to have a similar effect, in this case we're talking about central nervous system depression, and they may go about that in two different ways, but they still have the same end result effect, which is central nervous system depression. And so if they're given simultaneously, then they could have more of that effect than what they normally would just by themselves.
Okay. Is it possible, as you mentioned, someone who's feeling pain and nausea, they take just the pain medication?
Yes, that's typically what I recommend.
Okay. Does that affect the nausea?
Sometimes it does. You know, sometimes they'll take the pain medication, and maybe that it's just that it makes them a little bit more sedated so they're not as aware of the nausea, or maybe it sometimes helps the nausea. It seems to vary between one patient to the next, but as I said, typically we just recommend one thing at a time.
Could that be the case also for, say, someone who's feeling anxious and unable to sleep?
Yes, definitely. So if you took a pain medication, that's very likely to reduce the anxiety that you might be feeling at any given time.
Would it help you sleep also?
Yes, it would. Or it may, I should say.
Okay. Would you normally prescribe this combination of central nervous system depressants to an untrained layperson, for the lack of a better term?
No.
Why is that?
Because I just don't trust their ability to be able to use the medications properly, and they usually don't need it. They usually just need what I give, and so that's what I usually prescribe.
Why did you prescribe it here?
Because Martin was a physician, and he asked me for these things, and he mentioned all the concerns he had. He said, you know, I just want to have all the options available to me, and I felt like because he was a physician, I was willing to do that.
Okay. If Martin was not a physician, would you have entrusted Michelle with these drugs on her own?
Not the ones that I prescribed. I would have just told them, I think these will be fine, and then let's get through surgery for a while and see how you're doing. And if you have more trouble, give us a call, and then we can talk about some more prescriptions.
Okay, thank you. What were your instructions to Michelle and about these drugs?
The instructions, especially after I gave the extra ones, is that this is more medication than I normally prescribe, and you have to be really careful to only take what you feel like you need. And they can have overlapping effects, and so you just need to be really careful about taking these medications.
Okay. Regarding the instruction to take it as needed, in your experience, or based on your training and your experience, can you foresee any realistic scenarios in which all four of those central nervous system depressants would be needed together?
Your Honor, foundation.
Sustained.
I'll withdraw that question.
Okay.
Was it your intention that Michelle take all these drugs together?
No.
Would you have prescribed this combination to her if Martin was not a physician?
No.
Would you ever prescribe this combination to a different patient?
Maybe if it was a similar situation, I might.
And what would the similarity have to be?
I would have to feel like I trusted the caregiver or the person that was requesting it, that they understood the medications, and because I prescribe out of my normal routine all the time, but it's a situation dependent.
Did you ever have a discussion with Michelle about her general use of medications?
Just nothing more than, the ones that I definitely wanted her to take, like, for example, the antibiotic. And then beyond that, these are just to be taken as needed and only if you're having these symptoms.
Did she ever describe to you what her approach to medication use was?
No.
Okay.
Although I will say that she did indicate that she didn't like to take a lot of pain medication, or not pain medication, just medication in general, and she was going to try and minimize the amount of medication that she took. And most people tell me that they want to try to minimize the amount of pain medication or any other medication they take after surgery.
So her approach was typical to your experience?
Yes.
Did you in fact perform the cosmetic surgeries that you discussed with Michelle?
I did.
Will you, well, first of all, when was that?
The surgery was on April 3rd, 2007.
Where did that take place?
At Lakeview Hospital,
And what city is that in?
Bountiful.
Okay. Do you recall who accompanied Michelle to the hospital?
Yeah, Martin was there, but I don't remember if there was anyone else there or not, but I know Martin was there.
You don't recall, okay. Do you recall to whom her personal belongings were released?
I don't know that.
Is there usually a final checkup on a patient before surgery on the day of?
Yes, there's a kind of a brief visit in the what we call the pre-op area, where I see the patient and I talk to them again and make sure that they want to go ahead with surgery. They're always nervous, and we talk about their their concerns, and I make a lot of markings on the patient of things that I'm planning to. Places I'm planning to make incisions or nerves that I want to have a landmark on. And then there's a whole intake process that happens with nurses where their vital signs are checked, and a whole medical evaluation is done all over again by the hospital and by the anesthesiologist all before the patient goes back for surgery.
Okay. Do you review that final checkup before you start the actual surgery?
Yes,
And did Michelle have one of these?
she did.
Were there any concerns?
There weren't.
Okay, her vitals were okay?
Her vital signs were normal. Her blood pressure was normal.
Okay. Would you just describe briefly, mostly so we can get kind of a location on her face of where incisions were, but we just briefly describe what the procedures were that you performed?
Sure.
over that?
So I did a lower facelift, which involves an incision in front of the ear, and then it goes behind the ear and into the hairline here. And the skin is elevated up, and also the muscle underneath is elevated and suspended upward.
What's the intended result of that procedure?
The intended result of that is to correct jowling and neck laxity primarily.
Please continue.
And then I did a mid-face lift, which the incisions are up in the hairline, one here in the temporal area and one here right behind the front of the forehead on each side. And that's a deeper access surgery where I go down next to the bone and lift up the cheek area, and that's lifted up with sutures and secured to one of the chewing muscles, which is why some people have pain in the chewing after surgery. And then through that same incision, I do a forehead lift, and that incision is, again, accessed through the same area, and the forehead is lifted upward and suspended. And then also I did eyelid surgery, upper and lower eyelids, and the incisions for that are just in the creases of the upper eyelids and the lower eyelids, and also inside the eyelid.
And when it comes to, I think the mid and the upper, that's just make things look tighter and more youthful?
Correct, yeah, that's to lift the cheek area where people tend to start to look hollowed over time and get bags under the eyes. It's intended to address those issues.
The eyelids.
And the eyelids is mostly for just fullness, extra skin, and heaviness of the eyelids. And again, it's usually a tired appearance that we're trying to reverse or correct.
Okay. Your Honor.
Yeah, please. Counsel, will you approach? Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good time to break for lunch today. We will be in recess until 1:05. Please keep in mind my prior admonition to you. You're not to discuss any subject of the trial with each other or with anyone else. That would include family members or friends that you may see during the lunch hour. It's your duty not to form or express any opinion about the case until it's finally submitted to you. Avoid television, radio, or internet news coverage. Don't use computers or electronic devices to do research on your own or to communicate with others about the trial. Court's in recess.